Montana Territory, 1883. The wind cut sharp through the Bitterroot Mountains as Tessa Rowen gripped the reins of the stolen horse, her knuckles white, her face streaked with tears and sweat. Behind her, the world she had been forced into, a velvet prison owned by Baron Albrecht von Keller, burned away with every hoofbeat. She had not planned on fleeing this way, riding through the last of winter's thaw with nothing but a bag of bread, a pistol that shook in her hand, and the name of a cowboy scribbled on a letter she had never meant to open. But when the Baron's hand struck her across the cheek for the last time, something inside her snapped. She had arrived in America as a mail-order bride with hope in her chest. She left his estate in Wyoming with bruises and a heart that no longer believed in kindness. The horse gave out 2 days later. Tessa staggered toward the faint smell of smoke curling from a chimney between the pines. She collapsed 30 yards from the fence line. That was how Kade Zeller found her. His rifle was slung across his back, and his worn hat shaded eyes that had seen more loss than most men twice his age. He had been returning from checking traps when he saw her, a woman in a tattered dress, half conscious in the snow, the hem of her skirt soaked through. He crouched beside her, his voice low and steady. "Madam, can you hear me?" Tessa's lips parted. "Don't take me back," she whispered, her voice almost gone. "Please." Kade didn't ask questions. He gathered her in his arms and carried her through the gate, past the barn, and into the cabin where his 2 children stared wide-eyed from the hearth. "Gwen," he called gently to his oldest, "get the kettle hot." "Gabe, bring that blanket." Gwen, just 10, nodded quickly and went to work. Gabe, 6, ran to the cot and spread the blanket while his father laid the woman down carefully. Tessa woke in the middle of the night to warmth, the fire glowing low and steady, the smell of rabbit stew thick in the air. The boy was sleeping near the hearth. The girl had curled up on a chair. And the cowboy, the man with the quiet eyes, sat at the edge of the bed, sharpening a knife with slow, even strokes. "I'll leave come morning," she said, throat raw. "No, you won't," he answered without looking up. "You're half dead, and I don't turn folks out who need help. I do not want trouble. Ma'am, I already got 2 kids and a mountain full of wolves and weather. Trouble's not new to me." She looked around the cabin. It was worn but clean. A photograph of a woman sat on the shelf, his late wife, no doubt. Tessa closed her eyes. "I'm Tessa Rowen. Kade Zeller." Silence stretched out between them. Then she asked, "Why are you helping me?" He set the knife down. "Because someone ought to." By the end of the week, her fever broke. She did not ask to stay, but neither did he send her away. Kade watched her move slow but steady through the cabin, helping Gwen mend a dress, teaching Gabe how to read from a book she had pulled from her bag. She never talked about where she came from, but Kade had seen marks like the ones on her back before, on horses whipped too hard and men who had been prisoners. One morning, while he chopped wood, Gabe ran up to him, breathless. "Tessa's crying," he whispered. Kade wiped sweat from his brow and went inside. She stood at the window, holding a letter over the stove flame, watching it burn. Her shoulders were shaking, but her face was calm. "That from him?" Kade asked. She nodded. "He'll come looking. He always does. I can keep you safe. You do not know what kind of man he is. I know what kind of man I am." Tessa turned to face him. "Why would you risk your life for me?" Kade's jaw tightened. "You think I want my kids growing up in a world where men like that always win?" She stared at him for a long time. Then she sat down at the table, her hands trembling slightly. "I was supposed to marry someone kind. The letter said he had a farm, that he wanted children. I thought I was coming for that. Then the Baron's man met me at the station instead." Kade took off his hat and sat across from her. "I am not that man from the letters, but I got a farm, and 2 kids. Gwen still whispers your name in her sleep. Gabe calls you his angel." Tessa blinked fast, her voice low. "Do you want me to leave? I want you to stay." He did not touch her hand, but his voice made her heart ache. There was no pity in him, only a quiet, heavy kindness, the kind that asked nothing but gave everything. That night, she found herself standing just outside the cabin door, the stars wheeling above her like a sky she had never looked at properly. Kade stepped out beside her, arms crossed over his chest. "You all right?" She nodded. Your wife. I do not want to replace her. You are not, he said gently. She is gone. And you're here. She looked up at him. Do you want me to be? I think we all do. She exhaled slowly, and for the first time in months, her body did not feel like it was bracing for a blow. Kade stood beside her, solid and steady, and she let her shoulder rest just slightly against his arm. He did not move away. And in the quiet of the Montana night, with the scent of pine and the hush of wind through the trees, something between them shifted. Not fast. Not loud. But real. The snow melted into earth by mid-April, leaving the high meadows soft underfoot and the cottonwoods budding in pale green. Kade spent long days mending broken fence rails and checking on the cattle grazing higher up the slope. Tessa, now steadier on her feet, had begun tending the garden rows with Gwen, their hands deep in the soil as they planted early peas and cabbage. One evening, after Gabe had fallen asleep with his cheek pressed against a carved wooden horse, Kade found Tessa outside, stripping bark from a willow branch with a paring knife. She worked slowly, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, the backs of her arms freckled from sun. You're making something? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. She held up the branch. In Hungary, we used to weave these into baskets. My mother taught me. I thought Gwen might like one for her sewing things. He stepped closer, folding his arms. You've been real good with her. She's always been quiet since. Before. Tessa nodded but didn't press the silence. Instead, she said, she watches you when you don't know it. She tries to match your step. Kade looked toward the trees. She's got grit. Like her mother did. Was she from here? North Dakota. We met in Fort Benton. She was braver than I ever was, rode halfway across the country to marry a man she'd never seen. Tessa tilted her head. You wrote the letters? I did. She traced the edge of the knife along the wood without cutting. You say that like it surprises you. I guess I never thought anyone'd answer. Night settled around them, and the first frogs began to croak down by the creek. He watched her hands keep working. I've been thinking, he said after a moment, about the spring fair in Darby. Gwen's been asking to go. There'll be folk from all over. Music, pies, a barrel race if the horses hold steady. Tessa glanced up. I don't want to bring trouble to your family. He shook his head. You didn't. Trouble's something that finds good people. Doesn't mean they caused it. I haven't left this place since I came. Then maybe it's time. She looked down at the half-finished basket. I'll go if Gwen wants me to. She'll be glad. The next Saturday, Tessa rode beside Gwen on the wagon bench, her dress newly mended. Her hair braided back with a bit of blue ribbon the girl had insisted on tying in. The road into Darby curved through pine and larch, the river swollen with meltwater beside them. The town was livelier than Tessa expected, bright with canvas tents and the smell of roasting corn. Fiddlers played near the general store and children ran barefoot between booths. Tessa held Gabe's hand as he stared wide-eyed at a man juggling apples. Kade bought them all sodas. He handed her a bottle without a word, his fingers brushing hers only briefly. Tessa took it, heart thudding harder than it should have. They wandered past quilts and horseshoes, hand-painted mugs and jars of wild plum jam. Gwen tugged Tessa toward a woman selling fabric by the bowl. Tessa let her go, trusting the girl's eyes to find her way back. Feels strange? Kade asked beside her. Tessa nodded. I used to dream of days like this. Not grand things, just walking through a town and not being watched like property. He didn't answer right away. Then, you're not. She looked at him then, and he held her gaze. They didn't speak again until the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the road home. Gabe was asleep in the wagon bed, curled against a folded wool coat. Gwen leaned against Tessa's side, humming softly. Kade drove with one hand on the reins, his other resting on his knee. I meant to ask, Tessa said quietly, how you came to trust me. He kept his eyes ahead. Didn't have to. The children did first. And that was enough? Always has been. Tessa turned that over in her mind. The wind brushed her cheek, warmer now, carrying the scent of pine and earth. She glanced at Kade again and saw the faintest smile on his lips, not amused, not forced, just quiet and sure. She reached down and covered his hand on the bench, her fingers gentle. He didn't pull away. He turned his palm upward and laced their fingers together. Neither of them said anything. The wagon rolled on, steady and slow, toward the hills that rose like folded arms around the land they were beginning to share. The barn roof needed patching before the spring rains came in earnest, so Kade spent the better part of a week hauling up timber and shingles, steadying himself on the rafters as the sky threatened and held. Tessa brought him water in a clay jug and stayed to hand up nails when he asked, her balance sure on the ladder now. She didn't flinch when the hammer rang or when the wind swept loose hair across her face. She only tucked it behind her ear, eyes on the work. I was never taught to fix things, she said one afternoon, passing him a board. Only how to keep a table set and a hem straight. You're learning faster than most men I've worked with, Kade said. You see what's needed before I ask. She tilted her head and smiled, not with amusement, but something gentler. I had to learn how to see. By dusk, the ridgepole sat solid again, and he climbed down stiff-legged, wiping his hands on his trousers. Tessa was already inside, stirring something in the pot while Gwen shaped dough beside her. The smell of thyme and onions curled out the door. That night, after the meal, Kade sat at the table with a ledger, squinting by lantern light. Tessa watched him from the hearth where she was mending Gabe's shirt. You write small, she said. Paper costs, he replied without looking up. Then, after a pause, I've been thinking of selling 2 steers. Won't that weaken the herd? Some, but we need a roof on the smokehouse, new hinges for the gate, and Gwen's grown out of her boots. Tessa folded the shirt and set it aside. I could sew extra. Take them into Derby. There was a shopkeeper asking after linens. You do that. I want to pull my weight. You already do. She stood, brushing off her skirt. Not the way I want to. He met her eyes then, and something passed between them, no words, no gesture, just stillness that held meaning. She turned away first, but her fingers lingered on the doorframe before she stepped out into the evening air. 2 days later, she walked the 2 miles into town with a basket of hand-stitched cloths, lace-edged by candlelight, and returned with coins wrapped in muslin and a slip of paper offering more work. That night, she laid the earnings on the table without ceremony. It's not much, she said, but it'll buy the hinges. Kade looked at the bundle, then at her. You didn't have to. I know. He stood quietly, then picked up the muslin and set it in the tin box where he kept the bills. When he closed the lid, he stayed there, his palm resting on the top. Before you came, he said, I needed someone to help with the land. But I didn't know how much the rest of us needed something else. She didn't speak. Neither of them moved. I want you to have a place here, he went on. Not just as someone who passed through. She stepped forward, her voice low. I don't want to pass through. They stood close now, the firelight casting their shadows long against the wall. Kade reached out slowly and touched her cheek with the back of his hand. I didn't think I'd feel this again, he said. I never had it to begin with. He took another step, so that his breath stirred the loose strands at her temple. You do now. When he kissed her, it was soft, certain, and without urgency. A moment years in the making, though neither had known it until now. Later, she sat wrapped in his coat on the porch, watching the stars. He joined her without a word, their shoulders touching. The cattle lowed in the distance, and an owl called from somewhere deep in the trees. You think it'll last? She asked quietly. What? This piece. He rested his hand over hers. Only if we keep tending it. She nodded and leaned her head against him. The hills stretched dark and wide before them, the land steady beneath their feet. And for the first time since stepping off the train, Tessa felt not like a guest or a survivor, but something else entirely. Home. May brought long daylight and the kind of warmth that settled deep in the bones. The pastures turned lush, and the hills wore a brighter green, soft enough to make a man believe he might lay down his pain for good. Kade rose earlier now, hitching the wagon before the light fully cleared the horizon, and Tessa began feeding the hens before the rooster sounded. The rhythm of the ranch had become hers too, not by permission but by presence. She knew which cow limped and which gate leaned too far open. She could tell by Gwen's eyes when her lessons had gone sour and when Gabe needed a task instead of a story. She moved through the days with quiet purpose, and the place seemed to breathe easier around her, as if it had been waiting for her weight upon it. One afternoon, Kade returned from town with a coiled length of wire and a folded paper tucked into his coat. Tessa met him at the barn, brushing sawdust from her skirt. "They've posted a notice," he said, handing her the paper. "About the Baron." She unfolded it carefully. The words were brief, printed in firm type. Wanted for fraud and unlawful confinement. A reward was listed, and beneath it, a sketch that caught his likeness in the sharp chin and heavy brow. Her pulse quickened. "That's his seal in the corner," she murmured. "He always stamped his letters with it." "They're looking for him back east," Kade said. "Not our territory. But word's moving. What if he hears I'm here? He'd have to come through me first." She met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." Kade didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You don't have to be alone if he tries." "I know." Later that week, while Gwen and Gabe played a game with pebbles behind the woodshed, Tessa stood at the table measuring flour with a careful hand. Kade walked in, shaking dust from his hat. "I've been thinking," he said, setting it on the hook, "about the north field." She looked up. "There's flat ground there. Good light. Better than the slope behind the house." He stepped closer. "Could level it for a cabin." "A cabin?" she asked softly. "For you. If you wanted it." She folded her hands. "Do you want me apart from the house?" "No," he said. "I want you to know you have a place that's yours. Not just a corner of mine." She considered him for a long moment, then reached for his hand. "I don't want a cabin." "No? I want a room. In your house." "With you." He nodded once, his jaw tight with feeling. "Then the north field can grow oats instead." That evening, they walked the fence line together, checking where the wire had slipped loose from a post. The sun dipped low behind the ridge, casting the land in amber light. Tessa knelt to tie a sprig of wild sage into the fence as a marker. "I used to think I needed to keep moving," she said. "That standing still meant being caught again." Kade leaned against the post. "And now I think stillness is something you earn." He stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin lightly on her shoulder. She didn't flinch. She leaned into him the way a branch leans toward sunlight. "I want to marry you," he said quietly. "Not because I feel obliged. Because I can't imagine another season without you in it." She turned in his arms. "I never thought I'd hear those words from a man who meant them. You're hearing them now." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "Then let's do it. Not in secret. Not in shame." Gwen and Gabe stood beside them 3 weeks later, dressed in their Sunday best, as Reverend Walker opened his book beneath the cottonwood tree behind the barn. The neighbors gathered in small groups, their voices hushed with warmth. Tessa wore a dress Gwen had helped dye with walnut husks, and Kade had trimmed his beard for the first time in a year. They said their vows with hands clasped, no rings, no pomp, just the truth of it spoken plain and upright. After the guests had gone and the sun had set, Tessa walked the pasture with Kade, the children already asleep inside. She reached down to pluck a blade of grass, rolling it between her fingers. "I used to wonder if I'd always be running." "You're not," he said. She looked up at the stars, then at him. "I'm not." He took her hand, their fingers intertwined, and together they walked back toward the house where the fire still glowed in the hearth and a life waited, rooted, real, and finally theirs. By early June, the foothills were thick with wild rose, and the wheat in the lower field whispered as it moved in the wind. The cabin, once just Kade's, now bore signs of a fuller life. A second wash basin set beside the first, a new row of hooks for her shawls and aprons, a hand-carved shelf above the stove where Tessa kept jars of preserved rhubarb and early honey. They had settled into the long work of building something quiet and lasting. And though the days were full, they were not hurried. Kade's hands bore fresh calluses from repairing the plow, and Tessa's shoulders ached by nightfall from teaching Gwen embroidery and keeping up with Gabe's endless run of questions. But when the sun went down and the hearth burned low, they found one another without words, hands brushing as they folded linens, eyes meeting across the table with a steadiness that had nothing to prove. One Wednesday morning, Kade returned from the post office with a letter addressed to Tessa in a script she hadn't seen in years. She stood with her hands still damp from scrubbing the floorboards, staring at the seal. He set it in her palm. Came from St. Louis. She opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper. Her breath caught as she read, eyes sweeping left to right, once, then twice. "It's from my cousin Anna," she said. "She thought I was dead." "Did she mention the Baron?" "He's gone east. There's a court date set for September. They seized his estate." Kade nodded, brushing straw from his sleeve. "That chapter's closed, then?" Tessa folded the letter once more. "I never thought I'd hear my name spoken outside of his shadow." "You've made a new name here," he said. "One that belongs to you." That evening, after the children had gone to bed and the last embers glowed red in the hearth, Kade pulled a small wrapped bundle from beneath the cupboard. He held it out, silent. Tessa took it, unwrapping the cloth slowly. Inside was a brooch, silver and turquoise, with 2 small wildflowers carved into the setting. A local craftsman must have made it. It was delicate but strong. "For your Sunday dress," he said. "You should have something that's only yours." Her throat tightened. "It's beautiful. I wanted something that didn't come from anything before. Just now. Just us." She reached for his hand, curling her fingers around his. "I never expected to be loved like this." He stepped closer and rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't expect to love again. Not in a way that settled a man." Their lips met gently. The kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything more than what was already given. That summer passed in long light and steady work. Tessa's linens brought in orders from the hotel in Missoula. Gwen's reading advanced enough that she began copying passages from a borrowed Bible into a blank book. Gabe learned to tie knots and saddle a pony with only a little help. On their first wedding anniversary, they packed a basket and rode to the ridge above the north pasture. Kade spread a blanket, and she laid out bread, cheese, and a jar of apple preserves. He brought out a small tin cup and poured 2 servings of cider. "I never asked," he said as they ate. "But if you ever want to see your people again, travel back east, I'll ride with you." She shook her head. "No place ever called to me, till now." He smiled, eyes soft. "Then we'll stay planted." They sat side by side, watching the sky turn gold. Below them, the house caught the light on its shingles, and the smoke from the chimney drifted upward in a thin line. Years passed, but the heart of the place stayed the same. Tessa's baskets lined the walls of the schoolhouse in town. Kade's cattle grew strong and sold well. The children grew, Gwen tall and thoughtful, Gabe restless and curious, and neither ever left a room without kissing their mother's cheek. In time, folks stopped saying Kade Zeller's place and started saying the Zeller farm. And when travelers passed through and asked who lived there, the answer always came with a smile. A man and a woman who found each other after too much loss, and never let go again. And they didn't. Through all the seasons that followed, through the lean years and the good ones, through harvests and hard winters, through births and wakes and quiet Sundays, they remained side by side. Not because they needed to, but because they chose to. Again and again. Always.